Now, okay, so we're now recording, and so thank everybody for joining today. It's my pleasure to introduce my colleague, Hugh Price, who's Managing Director of Curiosity Software and has about 35 years experience in test data and automation, and Anil Kumar, who's a Senior Director and Robotic Process Automation at Changepond. So we have two speakers with great experience in testing and great experience in automation. And today they're going to be talking about test data automation and introducing some of the next generation in test data technologies. So with no further ado, I'd like to hand over to Hugh and Anil to get going with the session.
Hi everyone, it's Hugh here, and over to you, Anil, to start.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Thank you everyone for joining us here today. We are really excited to share our experience on test data management solutions. So before we deep dive into who Changepond is and our experience, I thought I'll just spend some time on this slide. So conversations not only help us reflect on where we are now, how we are handling things currently, but also helps us to unlock fresher thinking. And that's why we feel that through conversations, change happens. Today, the conversation is about test data and test data management. We all know that quality test data is the vital ingredient for testing to be successful. And I'm sure you all would appreciate that test data makes or breaks quality. So I'm pretty sure at the end of the webinar, each one of you will have something new to discover. Who can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah. So Changepond Technologies is a 20-year-old organization having its headquarters in Chennai, southern part of India, and has offices in the US, UK, Malaysia. So we help customers and businesses on developing solutions, application development, software testing, and maintenance. Over the last few years, we have been helping customers to embark on the digital transformation journey and are working with all the cutting edge digital technologies like robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, working on low code application platforms, etc. From software testing perspective, we offer a variety of services under the quality engineering umbrella. The services range from functional testing, automation, performance engineering, microservices testing, etc. The important thing is that irrespective of the service we offer, the theme that we adopt is to move towards continuous testing. Continuous testing is becoming very important in the world of Agile and DevOps. We find that the traditional way of testing is reaching its breakpoint. You have to make sure that you adopt to the newer ways of testing to make continuous testing a reality. At Changepond, we have different levers that we adopt to make continuous testing happen. And one important lever among them is having a good test data management solution. And that is where we have partnered with Curiosity and are jointly leading this initiative. Over the last 2 decades, we have worked with more than 100 plus customers. But I've just depicted only few logos here. And these are the customers who have adopted to the new way of testing and have started reaping the benefits. Who can we move on to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I would like to share a particular use case on test data management on one of the projects that we have executed. This is an asset services and information system project. This project was one of the pioneering healthcare privatization projects undertaken by the government of Malaysia. This basically is to promote planned preventive maintenance in government healthcare facilities and improve hospital asset performance. Asset here refers to anything from a simple stethoscope, which would cost something around $200 to $250, to a high-end scan machines, which would cost a few millions. So this slide shows the complexity of the application, the testing stats, and also the types of testing that we carried out. So the reason we chose the use case for today's webinar is that around mid-January this year, the government, anticipating the COVID outbreak, we're planning urgently to take care of COVID-19 patients before, during, and after the pandemic. So for this, they had to repurpose the hospital, identify the screening hospital, and designate hospitals with appropriate and adequate isolation facilities. They had laid down guidelines which had to be implemented. This meant that as a software solution provider, we had to roll out features and changes quickly. We had to customize the process to abide by the new guidelines, and we had to prepare to handle the multi-fold increase of daily transactions. So all these changes had to be incorporated, which means that changes had to be thoroughly tested. Now, the effort required to test the large volume of test cases in a very short span of time was humongous. So apart from automation, what came to our rescue is the test data management solution, which helped us a lot to quickly complete the testing. The reason I say this is because TDM helped us in numerous ways. First, we were able to create multiple test data for each test case. Basically, we were preparing ourselves for testing failures, if any, and we're ready with test data for retesting. Second, TDM helped us to mask the sensitive data as we had to abide by the data protection guidelines. And last but not the least, TDM helped us in allocating the data on the go. All these factors helped us to complete the testing in record time. So it's been 3 months that we released this to production. Touch wood, not even a single defect has been reported so far. While we have been working on this engagement for the last few years, this particular release gave us a huge satisfaction as we were able to help the government in small way to combat COVID-19. Our applications are currently acting as the frontline digital essential worker in fighting COVID-19. So this, can you just press enter who? So this is the application landscape, right? Now, if you look at the application features, your database, the data migration, you could imagine the volume of testing that we had to carry out. And obviously, apart from automation, test data management was essential, which helped us to complete the testing on time. The stats at the end shows the test cases that we executed for the COVID-19 CR. Can we move to the next slide, please? Yeah, so I'd like to end with this slide. So these 3 questions, I'm pretty sure are always there on the mind of the testing heads. Now, but now in the new normal, these questions need to be taken up seriously. Ability to respond to change quickly will be the need of the hour. And our submission here is that one of the solutions that this can be made possible is to have an effective test data management solution. And that's what you're going to hear from Hu Price for the next 30 minutes. Over to you, Hu.
Thanks, Anil. Move on a bit. Okay, I'm gonna do a few slides, but most a discipline in itself. If you try and count up all the amount of time that people actually, excuse me a sec, that actually spend time messing around with data, whether that's creating training environments, masking it, creating a small spreadsheet to test a small feature, etc. It actually does have to be an incredible amount of time. So here's some stats for you. These slides will be available afterwards, so I won't just read them out to you. So traditional test data management that's been around for quite a long time. This diagram is trying to show you that most people kind of used to rely on production data. There's some subsetting. The problem with subsetting is you do lose some sort of granularity with your data. And if you mask the data, you do actually, it risks the integrity of the data and leaves traces of production data. So although it is masked, you can find your way back from one individual piece of information to a person. It also, I think the key thing is it slows things down. So you don't really have the data that you need at the right time. So by the time you've copied it over, we were just talking to someone the other day, and it takes about 2 days to get the data over there, even with Delphix and products like that. But then by the time they've got there, they're out of date. So the other problem with using production data is just the sheer volume every time you run everything. Actually, most data in production is kind of good data, and it all tends to be the same. So it tends to be kind of business as usual behavior and a lot of happy path data. Now, what you find is that when it comes to new features, that you actually need to think about testing new and unreleased functionality. You need to think about edge cases. Most bugs come from an edge case or an unforeseen data scenario. So you should be thinking about trying to enhance your data to be better than production. I think that's probably the core message is, and we do actually measure the density of the data in one of our utilities. I don't have time to show it today. The other one is negative scenarios in terms of being able to, most data tends to be happy path. but most bugs come from a negative scenario which has somehow snuck into the system. So that could be a validation hasn't been tested correctly, or there's possibly an invalid set of combinations of data that may be coming from a configuration file that would cause problems. So this is the area that we tend to operate. We consider this to be kind of pretty much covered by most people's development strategies. Now, the big problem nowadays is just the explosion in complexity. Fine, we've moved from sort of 2-tier to 3-tier, but we've kind of moved to multi-tier with loads and loads of integration. So you've got to think about everything as a data journey, and it's satisfying all of the data that you need on that data journey. And that could be virtualizing some endpoints or stubbing. It could be building combinations of data to make sure you actually cover many more of the code paths. So it's the idea of being able to first of all map a data journey, and then being able to satisfy the right data at the right time as the data moves, as your maybe it's a payment moves through the system, or maybe it's a doctor's visit moves through the system. You need to be able to understand and provision the data as it goes from A to X, really. And that's kind of where it's become a lot more complicated. And also if you think about APIs are constantly changing versions, and you've got to basically allow the test data to support all the different versions as well. So not only do you have to deal with the API complexity, you've also got to deal with the test data mapping to the appropriate, either calling the API or the API calling it. Now, I'm just going to talk a little bit about masking data. You know, it's become commoditized now. There's lots and lots of test data masking tools out there. To be honest, they all use the same techniques for the most part in terms of how they mask data. The problem is that the effort that it actually takes to mask data, if you look at something like a complicated healthcare system, the trouble with just changing the names is fine, but then you've still got the addresses. You might have social security numbers or national insurance numbers in there. And then you've also got maybe particular dates of visits. So the real problem there is if all you need is one piece of information, maybe a visit to the doctor on a certain day, and you can pretty much work out who that person is from that one piece of information. And also, if you do change anything with numbers, then you've got to make sure that all the month ends roll up correctly. So it can actually cause, you know, it can be an absolute pain to try and mask data really, so it is pretty much protected. So we just put a little graph here just kind of show you, you know, names and national insurance numbers, easy, addresses, you can get into complexity there. But then as soon as you start getting into this type of stuff, the amount of effort, it's really not worth it. And you should probably think about just switching to fully obfuscation. So we've sort of come up with the phrase introducing test data automation. It used to be called test data management, but actually if you think about the way that most people provision data now, it is part of some kind of automation framework. And what we've done is we've actually created a test data automation framework which can be called or can call other frameworks. So this test data automation framework is built for complete, including data for unreleased functionality, outliers, and lots of negative scenarios. The reality is, the more data you create, you're actually compliant. You're not only testing better and delivering faster with higher quality, but you're actually compliant. So it actually kills many birds with one stone. It's also affordable nowadays. You know, you've got various, you know, the ability to spin up Docker containers. So it's very easy to spin up, 1,000 Docker containers, each with a different set of configurations in it. And that allows you a lot more flexibility. And also it's actually pretty affordable to be able to do that kind of stuff. So, this idea of driving in much more sophisticated data into the DevOps and CI/CD pipelines is really kind of the way to go nowadays. And that's where really everyone is heading that we're seeing at the moment. Okay, so just to give you a little idea of kind of how it works. Now, sitting in the middle are a set of test data automation agents. Now, these could be subsetting, masking, we could be generating some data. You might want to do some comparison, for example. Comparison is quite good where you run a test and you want to see what's actually happened to the data before and afterwards. That gives you your actual results, which you can then compare with your expected results. Most people spend a lot of time finding data. We can kind of turn that into a widget. Now, all of these are sitting inside our test data automation framework. and you can then just invoke them. Now, the idea is that these are all connected into either specific databases or structures, maybe EDI, XML, XBRL, things like that, or maybe directly into ERP systems such as SAP or Oracle eBusiness or something like that. Once we've got these configured, then they go into what we call our test data catalog, and then you can then start firing the data out, either on demand or as part of an automation framework, to match with the particular testing that you need. And we can fire this off in parallel. I'll show you that in a bit. Now, a lot of what everyone's up to nowadays is trying to build a lot more automation inside their sprints. We basically have libraries that allow these automation frameworks to actually just make calls directly out to our test data catalog and say, provision me this data now. So the automation will actually just provision the data right at the beginning of the automation script. Or you might just want to work in, just basically build a manual test data as well, and just basically just work in here. Now, in terms of what it actually looks like, sitting at the bottom, we have a tool called VIP. I'll actually just jump into that. Now, VIP is, it's basically a robotics process automation tool, but it's very much focused on kind of the DevOps world. We have lots and lots of connectors in here. We can push and pull data into databases. We can push it in and out of Excel. Here, what I've done, I've actually got myself, I'm actually reading some Kafka, and Kafka is basically a message queue. And all I'm doing, you can see it's pretty easy. Instead of writing code, you just drag and drop. I'm going to post to a Slack message, a Slack channel saying hello, initialize a client, subscribe, wait for a message, and post it. I can actually just execute that. And that will then just go off and look to see if any messages are coming through connected to Slack. And now it's looking for Kafka. And you can see I'm now firing data into the Kafka queue like that. Now, so that is a very powerful tool. Now, that tool sits at the bottom, and that allows us to connect into pretty much anything. We can do green screen on the mainframe, we can call any API, we can push and pull into databases, flat files, all sorts of formats, mobile, Windows applications, and obviously into ERPs. Now, as I said, we have a set of standard utilities, which are mostly in the sort of subsetting, generation, allocation, EDI, etc. But then what we want to do is to take control of what you have. The chances are that you already have some good stuff, but it might be a bit kind of random. Only certain teams use them, or maybe one or two people use them, or they're parts of an application which are actually quite useful that some people use in automation. But we want to try and democratize it and bring it out. So any legacy stuff you had, we will actually bring it into the same framework. So you can call your own masking routine or your own EDI generation routine, doesn't really matter. We can also build you some custom stuff as well, and you can also build your own as well if you need. And it's pretty easy within VIP to be able to create your own kind of test data automation activity. We then push them all into a test data catalog, and that catalog allows us to, it's kind of a one-stop shop. You basically go in and say, I need this type of data, I need it for a manual test, either go and find me that data or make me that data. Now, this then sits inside our VIP server orchestration engine, which is sitting waiting for work. You can have many of these and you can Dockerize them. So you can have them sitting in Docker land, and you can have lots and lots of parallel processes waiting for work. Now, we can either call your orchestration engine or they can call us. So quite often you may have something like an Informatica Power Center or something like that, and you can just make calls out to us and we will just in effect invoke the test data that we need. And then, of course, you're into all the different other ways that you could then just provision the data. Now, Test Modeler, I'm not going to talk about that today, but Test Modeler is a very powerful model-based testing tool that allows you to define your automated scripts. And I'll show you how we use it to design test data. And also, automation scripts, as I said, can go and invoke this to get the data, and also, products like Gherkin, schedulers, environment managers, Jenkins, and then also we can then just push things into forms like so. So multiple methods of invoking and controlling the test data automation jobs. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of pretty much blast into a demo. Now let's just think about something like an HR system. So you might want to mask it. You might want to analyze it to kind of understand how good the data you've got in there is. You might want to subset it because it's just way too big and you want to send off a small subset to one of your partners to do some development work. You might want to mask an HR extract, which is maybe a flat file because you're doing a migration. You want to supplement the extract. So not only do you want to just mask a flat file, but you might want to add in some extra color to it. You want to supplement the HR by synthetically creating extra employees and payment histories. You might want to think about coverage. Let's think about how do we improve the data in the HR system to be much richer. So, you know, we can pretty much run 1,000 automated tests and make sure we hit every scenario. Everyone, you have someone on holiday, you have someone on holiday whose manager's on holiday also. You know, we can analyze the HR as well. We can push HR into search engines, and then you can do lookups to make sure your business intelligence works and the data matches when you're actually searching for it using pie graphs, etc. Okay, so there's lots, and you might want to do some comparison. So those are all sorts of, you know, typical types of things you might want to do as far as HR goes. Now, the first thing I'm going to do, we're actually working with the little global HR database, which has a lot of tables, and there is a fair amount of complexity and interrelationship between them. But at the moment, I'm just kind of working with the workers table. And what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go in and I'm just going to fire off a job. Now, what we have is our little portal here. I'll go to my HR and let's just mask an HR database. Do I want to scan it or mask it? In this case, I'm just going to mask it. Now, normally this would be done on a separate secure system, but that's firing that job off. Now, while we're waiting for that, it doesn't take too long, to be honest. This is kind of how we go about masking. The first thing we'll do is scan the data, and we're looking for categorizations of data to make sure the different levels of masking that you want to do. So we will search for data basically using regular expressions, etc. Now, what we have is a vast array of masking functionality, and if you actually we have about 160 different types of masking functions, which can then be used in interrelated ways to go through and assign different kind of masking levels that you care about to each one. And here I've just gone through and done a very simple mask, which is just person ID. If we go back over here now, you'll see this is finished. And if we go and have a look at the results, what I've done here is I've created an audit file, and you can see we've done the person names. So in this case, we've masked. In this case, I've turned auditing on just to show you the differences between the first names and the last names as they've gone through. And you can see they've kind of changed as they've blasted through. Now, what's happened here, that's probably done somewhere like 600,000 rows of data in about a couple of minutes. So we have got, you know, some very high performance engines sitting there. The next thing I might want to do is say, well, let's go back to my HR and think, let's do something like maybe a subset. So let's just subset it. Now, in this case, what I want to do is I don't want 600,000. I just want to say 60,000. And what I'm going to do here is just execute a subset. Now, what will happen is it will start at one or several driving tables. It will then work its way down through those tables and basically crawl across the data. And here you can see what it's done. If we just take a look at the log file, it's basically telling us what it's done. And then if we come to here, this will give us a little subset report. Now, what's happened is it's issued SQL as it crawls across the database looking for the subset. So it's actually quite a clever way of being able to subset it. And in this case, what it's done is extracted about 10,000 rows of data out of my HR database, which can then be moved on into a development database. And if we go back and have a quick look at our test data automation engine, you'll see here we're tracking all the jobs that's going on. So here we were doing some masking, and here we're doing some subsetting, and it's just firing that off like so. Now, I might also want to do, someone might say, well, I need to send off a flat file. So I want to send off a flat file to someone. And what I'm going to do, I need to mask that file so I can actually just send that off to someone. And I've removed all the data from it. So here I'm just basically going through, and let's just do data mask CSV. Let's go and find the file that I want to mask. Now, when I'm masking the data, I can actually mask it. I can think about, let's just pick up some random data, which is just going to change the data randomly. But I could get a little clever and I could actually play around with some of the variables and actually put some valid and invalid data in it. So I could maybe put some invalid data because I want to test a data load. So not only am I masking it, I'm supplementing it. Now here, once again, I'm just firing off a job to our batch engine. This is reading the file in, and then it's then going to take that file and just remove the data. And when it comes back, we'll just have a quick look and it'll just show you the old and the new. Just give that a second. Just get ready for the next thing while we're waiting for that. So let's just have a look at the next thing up, which is this thing here. Okay, so yeah, that's finished. And then if we take a look in here, you'll basically see this is now delivered to me. This was the original file, and this is the new file. And all I can do then is just compare the two of them. If I just move that one over to there and have a look at this one and move that over to there. You can see what we've done here is we've changed the names, and if we'd gone through and changed some of the other security attributes as well, we could then update some of these other values as well as it passed through our masking and supplementing engine. So you can see hopefully that what I'm doing here is I'm kind of gradually just adding in these test data automation tasks. Now we're going to get into the probably more interesting stuff, which is how do I go about actually supplementing the data or generating the data. Now we have a very powerful data generation engine. I'm just going to quickly show you. So the way that it works is we scan the tables that you're interested in. Now the data generation doesn't just have to be into databases. It can be into any structure you've got. It could be an XML file. It could be complex EDI files. It doesn't particularly matter. Now what we've done is we scan the data in the database. We looking for relationships. We look for tables. We look to see how these tables are mapped together. And then what we do is we can then come through and use those data generation functions that we had before. And it doesn't take very long to do this. I mean, it probably takes maybe an hour to build a reasonable data generation for 4 or 5 tables. So it's quite straightforward. You can also parameterize up stuff, and you can see what I've done here is I've actually gone through and done a whole bunch of parameterization, which allows me to create much more sophisticated data. Now, I could come in and say, let's go back to my HR and say, let's just go and create an HR worker. Now, how many do I want? Let's just have 5 of them. Now here I'm saying how many emails per worker do I want? Let's just say 2. How many name changes? 3. Do I want to check their duplicate? No. Leave that one. And I've created a little form with a few. It's a promotion. It's a promotion. And when did they start? Somewhere in that range. And I can fire this job off. And if you've got to think of this really as someone needs to go and find some data or to make some data for a specific scenario. And in effect, that's what I'm doing now is I'm just generating the data and I'm pushing it out into, again, this is run, and that's generated my data. And here you can see I've turned on, please create me a CSV as well. And what this will do is it will actually generate me a little CSV file. And you can see for the 5 people, we've actually gone through and done some name changes as we've changed them through like so. So it's very straightforward to think of things as a scenario. Now, that's kind of the phase 1. Now, what most people want to do really is they say, well, I want to actually start creating a spread of data. Now, what we can do is we could also just give you, just for ease of use, we've actually allowed you to create that data using a spreadsheet. And here you can see what I've done is I've actually gone through and we'll pick up the drop downs again. So, oops. So basically, I've got all my various reasons that I can pull up data. My system's looking for some reason. And what I can do now is I could then actually just say, well, let's go and generate some data, but I'm going to use that template that you created. So let's just submit that. And you've just created a little bit of data for me. So in terms of the data request that you want to do, I'm going to fire this in. And that is now going to go and generate some data for us, but it's going to create 5 different scenarios because that's what we put in the spreadsheet. And what you'll see actually is our test data automation engine is actually then just firing off a bunch of data generates. And you can see they're all running in parallel here. It's just firing, creating lots and lots of different data scenarios. And all I had to do was put it into a spreadsheet. Now that's all very good, but it's still a little bit sort of manual if you think about it. I'm still thinking about things as more of a kind of scenario. Now, what we could also do is we could say, well, let's just go into models and let's just go. And what I want to do is I'm going to very quickly build a model. Now, what we've created is we could actually build a data request. I could go and find that spreadsheet, which you defined. You actually put the values into it. You decided what you wanted. And what we'll do now is we'll actually build you a model. Now, this model is basically all the data that you filled in on that spreadsheet. Now, if you think about that, that's pretty quick to be able to build ourselves a model. So we've gone from a data generation function or a data find function, and we've kind of created ourselves a model. Now, the reality is when it comes to modeling, you've got to be a little more careful than just having kind of the Cartesian product. So here you can see I'm just playing around with someone who's had a lot of email changes or name changes. I'm interested in those because I'm testing drop downs. But the thing that where it gets a bit more interesting, a lot of the extra stuff can only work if the person is an existing employee. So what I've done is I've actually changed the model here to say go through. For hire, none of these are going to apply because it's a brand new hire. So by modeling out the data with a few simple drag and drops, when it comes to the tests that I created, you can see I've created a bunch of tests here. Now, all I have to do is let's just go over here and create some tests. Let's say I want low coverage. Let's just do low. And what this will do is it's going to generate me each one of these is a distinct combination of variables that are then going to be pushed into my database. Now, it doesn't have to be just into a database. If you think about this, this is almost a data journey. We could push this into a virtual database or maybe into something like a service virtualization tool, or we could create flat files out of it at the same time. So we're not just tied to one particular thing. Now, if I come back into here, what I've done is I've got a good spread, and what will happen is when I click generate, it's actually going to go off and generate me one each of these. So you're going to end up with quite a good spread of data by basically just building the model, click generate, and then you just fire the job off. Now, what I could also do is I could say, well, for my testing, I'm actually only interested in new hires. So you can see here what I've done. I've created bunch of test cases, or in this case, test data, which is going to test each different data scenario, but it's only associated with a hire. Now, one of the sort of great things about model-based testing or test modeler is you can define kind of business rules on top of it. So if I come in here and look at the rule, oops, you'll see that we've actually come in and I've said if the new hire is set to Y, go down this route. If not, go down this route. If it's set to no, go down here. So it's very easy to be able to create these different types. So this one, you'll see we're just going down the existing staff like so. Now all I have to do, same thing, is just say go off, execute. And what I'm doing here is I'm actually pushing the data out into the database, but I'm doing it, you know, I'm basically creating a big spread of data by taking the parameterization and creating the models. And from that model, I then map that through my test data generation. Okay, so hopefully you can see that's a pretty straightforward way of being able to generate data. Okay, and then if we go into our database, what you'll see then once that's finished is that we're actually creating a much richer spread of data, and this is actually pushing the data in. So this is the data that we're actually coming in. And you can see that we're playing around with a lot of the data with the effective dates and the end dates based on the model of the data that we're creating. Okay. Now, if we go back to VIP Executor here, what I'm going to also do is I'm just going to go back to that particular scenario that we were creating, which was a specific HR worker scenario. So if I come in here, say I want 5 of them, I want 2 of those, and let's actually go for a transfer, and it's a job change. Okay. Now, instead of executing this job, what I could do, I can actually incorporate this into a DevOps pipeline. So if I come in here, I'll see that it's actually created 3 files for me. And all I have to do is just copy these. I'm just going to pop them over into a little folder here. These to here. And I'll just switch over to, I'll just run this, and then while it's running. So what's happening now, this is how it would be invoked from inside something like a Jenkins engine. Now we've got this XML file here. Now what we can do with that, whoops, wrong one. This one here. Maybe just open it like that. You can see all of those parameters that we put in here are available in the XML. So when it comes to something like Jenkins, you can play around with these using the various script management tools to be able to fire that data off. And you'll see here that actually this job has now finished. And if we go back up into our VIP Executor and we look at our Hopper jobs, you can see that we actually created 25 rows, which is pretty much what we asked for there. And we've done that in terms of a Jenkins job. Now you can also go in and you can look at the log files and it can push data around wherever you want within there. Okay, so hopefully you can see that what we've done here is we've gone through, we've done a bit of masking. I've obviously gone very quickly here. This is video, so you can have a look at it. Here you can see I'm doing something like maybe pushing HR to Kafka queues. If you're interested in something like maybe a high performance tool, we can also move, if you have very large amounts of data, so maybe here, for example, I want to do something like populate data into something like a Solar database. I'm just going to take the whole things and I'm just going to purge what's there. And all I'm going to do, I can actually just fire this off. It's going to set it up in multiple threads. So if you do need some high performance population, and again, we can just have a quick look to see what's happening here. We've got some very clever utilities which will split up data movements into parallel processes. So it's not only this idea of being able to fine finger control all the data generation stuff and all the modeling and all linking it into the automation frameworks, but actually you can see here what we're doing is we're actually populating. If any of you have ever worked with something like Solar, it's very difficult to load data in high performance. So what we've done is we've used this, but you could use this for moving data around on mainframes, or you could move it to if you're moving data into the cloud and you need, 10, 20, 100 million rows, then we can just use this parallel concept. You can see it's actually just moved, I think probably a couple of million rows in a couple of seconds here as well. So, and this is using this concept of test data automation in that by using automation techniques, we've been able to split up what would have been a single query into multiple queries. Okay, so that was probably the world's fastest demo. I'm going to create a video which covers that, and I'll probably do it a bit slower to kind of cover all the different things that were in there. So Tom and the Changepond lads will be able to follow up with you with a video on top of that. So providing test data that's built for today's delivery practice, self-service and on-demand. You can see it's available in parallel and without upstream constraints. It's automated. A full catalog of TDM utilities are embedded within standard test data automation. Sorry, I did miss out the test data catalog. I'll just quickly show you that. So the test data catalog is basically, this is the catalog of all the various different test data activities that I can use. And then when you're ready to run it, maybe you're running something like a manual test. You can see here that we've actually just created some data and we found some data like so. If you're running more of an automated test, you would actually then put it into something like something like this, and that's going to then you run the automation, and that's going to populate the data here. You can also then in the automation land actually come in here, and when you have some data, when you find this person, you would actually know which test case it's associated with. So you have the other way of looking at it. So if I have a bug, I can say, oh, right, well, this failed. Where did that come from? What's the scenario associated with it? Okay, sorry, so come back to this. Let's just go back over here. So automated, a full catalog of test data management utilities are embedded within a standard test data automation. Automated test data preparation combines TDM tasks in one repeatable process. Testers can parameterize and reuse any TDM task. So basically all I had to do was take a test data task, put a parameter on it, and then I expose that as a question on the form, and then, or maybe make it a drop down, and then everyone can then fire that task off in the way that they want it to. Okay, test driven and built for quality. Missing data is found or made automatically during a test run. It's very easy to create bad data. I'll just again show you something about bad data. So if we go and look at maybe something like PL SQL. So in PL SQL, this is some interesting models in here. So if we look at something like IBAN validation. So this is a model of, this is a specific, just it's a 28 character field called IBAN. And you can see what we've done here is we've actually created valid and invalid IBAN destinations. And when it comes to, if I want to then just have a look at the test cases, I've got all my various valid and invalid combinations of data. Now that is very useful when it comes to testing because it allows me to test negatively much more rigorously. And I think you'll find a lot of automation scripts will have a little bit of negative testing, but it's very easy using modeling to be able to create lots of combinations of data up front. All of them should be rejected. So what you're actually thinking about is testing the validation by creating invalid combinations of data that should be kicked out. If anything actually gets into the system, that means you found a bug. Okay, and it's better to find it during the validation than it is later on when the system falls over. And this really is kind of a core point. A hybrid approach gradually replaces mass data with synthetic data. I think probably the kind of rule of thumb is start with what you have, build it into an automated structure, democratize it, in other words, let other people use it, look for labor-saving areas, build those in. Then you start looking at more interesting space like test data automation generation, and what you're thinking about there is generating data, synthetic data. Now the data doesn't have to just go through the front end, it could also go through APIs, it could go through flat files, it doesn't particularly matter to us, but the result is that data will get into that system, or you will be able to go and find the data that you need for the appropriate test. TDA can also work with existing tooling, and you know, and the core point here, I think, as Tom says, is to avoid rip and replace and maximize value. I think probably the point is that test data is, you know, it's a certain percentage of the budget, and what we tend to think about it is we are not going to come in and actually solve test data for you overnight. It's a bit of a, the best thing to do is to solve it for one or two projects first of all, and then build up best practice within those projects, and then slowly roll them out to the other teams, and then reusing the test data automation widgets, you know, whether that's generating data, masking data, creating covered sets of data, all of those things then become available to you when you're as part of your ongoing test data strategy. Okay. So Tom, that was probably the world's fastest demo.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And thank you, Anil. So, yeah, we're now going to have a live Q&A. So we've had a couple of questions already, but if you do have any questions, please use the chat box in the bottom. You can also use the Q&A box. Alternatively, you can click raise hand, and then I'll be able to unmute you if you would like to ask your question live. So please do send your questions. Here, the first question we had, which was sent to me, was how does this work with Docker and containerized systems?
Sorry, just muting myself. Yes, so Docker is kind of monster. It's everywhere we go now. So what we've got built in to VIP is basically, oops, excuse me, all of the various different things that you need to do with Docker. So for the most part, what you're actually doing with something like a Docker container is populating the data inside that Docker container. Now we can basically go and create you a Docker container, pull it out, set up a starter schema in it and then push the data into it that you need, something like a Solr or a SQL Server or something like that. Now that usually has to be incorporated as part of kind of a manifest creation. You know, you have a manifest of the type of things that you want to create. But if you think about the way that I created those models, you could think about, for each different coverage type that I care about, is just spinning up different covered sets of data into each Docker container. So previously, you know, the thought of spinning up separate databases for a different type of testing, maybe negative testing or load testing or unit testing, is actually a pain. But actually you could spin up hundreds of Docker containers, or you could have, you know, provision each developer with their own Docker container, and then all they'd have to do when they need a new one, they would just go in and say, I need some new data, let's just go to Docker and just say Docker Solr and Kafka. Yeah, so basically in here I want to go in and create my Docker image. Sorry, this one. So this one here, I want to set up an image, set up the container, static schema, choose my schema, choose the Solr core, maybe do some subsetting. I want to mask some data and I want to mask it using that mapping. And then I click execute, and that's going to then push the data out into my Docker containers, you know, fully hydrated, which is a nice term. Okay, is that okay on that, Tom?
Great, yeah, thank you for that one. So we've had another question, which is, does this integrate with Delphix?
Yes, so all these tools, Delphix, Actifio, are brilliant. They're absolutely phenomenal. I mean, the tech behind them is really, really good. And it's very useful when it comes to kind of environment management, speed in terms of spinning up data. You still have got the problem is that you're very much dealing with a copy of production data. So you have all of the problems of it's pretty thin, and you're probably lucky to get more than 20% code coverage with production data. Also, even if you get the data quite quickly, by the time you've done the masking on it, because there is generally you still have to mask that data, it is going to be out of date. So if you've got anything time sensitive, it might be, you know, half a day out or 2 days out. And the other one is whenever you copy a full copy of production data into your development environment, you kind of clobber all your specific test cases. So developers and QA people will basically spend some time setting up a particular scenario, and then suddenly it all gets clobbered. So what we do with Delphix is you've got to think of it as use Delphix to kind of create the initial sets of data, and then add in the supplemental data with all of this lovely coverage and variations and variability on top of it, and then maybe populate some virtual databases using something like the Parasoft or Micro Focus SV tools to actually populate the additional data into those at the same time. So it's very much part of the of a DevOps pipeline, but without really good right data, right time, it's only maybe 10 or 20% of the story. Okay.
Cool, perfect. Thank you very much, Hugh. So I've just had a question in the Q&A box. So it asks, one of the challenges we have is having to use JMeter to generate our data. We use the Salesforce platform for our applications. How does this work with Salesforce IDs?
Salesforce IDs. I'm not that familiar with Salesforce IDs, to be honest, so I can't particularly answer that one. I don't think I have my Salesforce connectors in there. Let me just check. Salesforce. Sorry, I don't have Salesforce yet. What we'll do on that one is we will actually get back to you on that. Tom, if you can pick that up. I mean, the reality is, when you're dealing with something like an ERP, you are to a certain extent restricted by the data that you can push in and pull out of those ERPs. Now, if you look at most APIs, they're actually pretty good nowadays. It's pretty easy to get the data out with an API, and you can manipulate it, and you could also push data in. You can also push data in through the front end, because if you need to get data in, you could actually create data, just record a script, and we've got some recorders to do that, which will push data directly in, and bingo, you've got the data, you've got the data in. If you've got something like a Salesforce ID, which I assume is something like a unique identifier, then you've got a problem there in terms of how you actually push that into a development environment. If it's a masking problem, the way to do that is using a hashing technique. So you create a new set of Salesforce IDs and you hash them from the old ones. So it would always go to the same new Salesforce ID, but it would be unrecognizable in terms of masking. You could also use the same technique when it comes to generating data as well. I think we'd need to have probably a separate workshop on that one just to understand the various wrinkles on that, but it's actually a pretty straightforward transform if it's just a matter of mapping Salesforce IDs from old to new ones.
Great, thank you, Hugh. So yeah, that one was asked anonymously, but if you would like to get in touch to discuss that further, we'll be providing Hugh and Anil's email address. So that's all the questions, Hugh, we have for now. If you'd like to go to the last slide, if anyone has any further questions, please do type them in the chat, or alternatively, you can share them with us via email.
Okay, so Tom, do you want to, we're going to wrap this up. Anil, do you have any final words on some of the stuff that I was talking about?
No, I'm good, Tom. I think we are happy to have an online workshop if anyone is interested, and that we could have a team up with you and solve your test data challenges together. So we are happy to have an online workshop if anyone is interested.
Yeah, I think that's probably a very good point, Anil. So the best, every single test data problem is different. It is very, very rare that we come across exactly the same problem from one site to another. So the best thing to do is to just set up an hour workshop with us where you kind of explain what your particular problem is. And we will kind of kick it around. We might show you a bit of technology where we've either solved it before or we're close. Or we might go off and say, well, actually, if you create a small utility, you might be able to do this, or we might do some research. So there's not, I would say that probably once or twice a week I'm doing workshops, and it could be, I need to age data, I need to deal with Salesforce IDs, I need to push data, you know, I need to take data into Solar containers, but I'm really interested in complex searches. How can you help? You know, so I think the best thing to do is to, you know, the reason you kind of hopefully joined in this is because you're interested in test data, but you probably have some specific problems in front of your nose. So if you can get in touch with us, we will do a 1-hour workshop where you can present to us what your problem is, and then we can together think about maybe different ways we can solve that with you. Okay. Tom, is that all right?
Yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, as you know, as Hugh says, we're happy to book in any follow-ups. We're going to email out ways in which you can get in touch. So please do that. So Hugh, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what you can see on the screen here is, you know, how to get in touch with Hugh and how to get in touch with Anil. Please do that. The session has been recorded. We'll share the recording with you, and also any other follow-up actions via email. So I think the only thing left really to say is thank you to everybody who's joined us live today, and really a huge thank you to Hugh and also to Anil from Changepond for joining. I hope you've enjoyed the session as much as we have, and please get in touch anytime.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.